Okay, I would like to go over the schedule real fast with you so you have a sense of what we'll be doing and how much reading is going to be entailed in the course. And then I might just want to say a few things to help us get started to think about what philosophy might be, uh, how philosophy might be similar or different than studying other kinds of disciplines or fields. So, in order to do that, let's look at the syllabus. Um, so, this is an Excel document. The schedule is revisable. I'm hoping that we stick to the schedule, but I'm just going to see how things go over the next weeks, and we'll just see how it goes. So, with this first week, Monday through Wednesday, I want you to read not all of Descartes' meditations. There are six of them all told. We're just going to read the first three throughout the week, and through Wednesday, just look at the first two, as well as this one-page excerpt from Friedrich Nietzsche from this book called Beyond Good and Evil. Um, Thursday through Saturday, we are going to look again at meditation 2. We're going to cut off about halfway through. And then I want you to read this piece from Simon Blackburn called Knowledge. It's from an introductory text to philosophy. And a lot of it's going to sound familiar based on what we say earlier in the week. But then we're going to focus on some of the later passages in Blackburn that cover Meditations 2 and 3 from Descartes. So that'll be the first week. After that, we will go back to look at some ancient texts from Plato and Socrates, uh, first with the Euthyphro, and then a kind of not direct response but indirect response to the problem that's presented in Euthyphro from Søren Kierkegaard in Fear and Trembling. And then a few other texts, the Apology of Socrates, and then a short dialogue between Socrates and his friend Crito. So that'll be week 2. Week 3, we're going to deal with ethics in a couple of ways. First, with an applied ethics issue concerning abortion. Secondly, with what's considered normative ethics or ethical theory from two key thinkers in this field, Immanuel Kant and John Stuart Mill. So look at that. In weeks 4 and 5, we're going to alternate topics. So at first, we're going to look at some social political philosophy. This philosopher who's currently living, Michael Sandel, is going to help us think about libertarian political philosophy. We're also going to read a short story from the novelist and author Leo Tolstoy called How Much Land Does a Man Need? In the latter half of that week, we will look at some notions of the self or of individuality with Simon Blackburn again, and then this other guy, Alva Noet. He's going to give us a different kind of idea of the self. In the following week, we will follow up with the social political philosophy by looking at a few more items from Sandel, one dealing with markets, economics, and morals, and then the other taking us back again with the ancient Greeks, so looking at a different view of social political philosophy deriving from Aristotle. Again, in the latter half of the week, we're going to deal with the notion of the self by looking at another person who's a novelist, but this is an essay written by Jonathan Franzen called My Father's Brain. Finally, in the last week, we will look at a couple of issues from Robert Nozick and Todd May, a couple of thought experiments, and we'll see what happens in the latter half of the week. I just haven't decided yet what we will cover. So that's the general schedule. The readings are a bit uneven. Sometimes the readings will only be a few pages, sometimes maybe only up to 10 or 15 pages at a time. Others are going to be longer. They're going to be 40 or 60 pages at a time. So you might have to adjust your own schedule based on how long the readings are. And even for the shorter readings, what you'll find, I think, is that they are still heavy despite being a bit lighter in terms of length. And so one thing to note from the very beginning is that because this is an introduction to philosophy, I don't presuppose that you've ever read any philosophy in the past. Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. But reading philosophy can be a bit different than reading other types of prose. It's different than reading a short story or reading a novel or a novella. It's different than reading poetry, it's different than reading a biology textbook or a mathematics textbook or social sciences. And so one of the things we're going to learn in the class is both how to read philosophy, especially in terms of finding the structure of the text, which I'll try to emphasize as we go along, but then also how to write in philosophy, which tends to be either, at least the two kind of formats that we're going to follow in this class, they tend to be either argumentative pieces, where somebody takes up a position and then tries to defend that position as best as possible, or something of an essay, perhaps an argumentative essay, in which one is trying to formulate, one is setting out something new, a series of thoughts that are intended to follow upon one another, and they try to investigate and explore a topic. And so, as we look at this schedule and look at the readings and the writings, everything might be a little bit new for you, and that's perfectly expected and fine. Okay, let me do one more thing before we turn over to the Descartes text. I want to just say a few things about the branches of philosophy. And people divide philosophy in different ways, but I want to use one kind of division. In order to do that, I actually want to try to write down some of these ideas. So hopefully this will work. So let's just call this some branches. And my handwriting will get better, I hope, on this program that I'm using. Hopefully it'll all be readable and legible. So let me get just a few terms down so we can get started, because I'm going to use these terms throughout our course. There are different ways of dividing up what people do in philosophy, what different branches or subfields there happen to be. So one subfield is called metaphysics. Metaphysics deals with very large and fundamental questions that perhaps are unasked in just about every other field or discipline, either in the humanities or the social sciences or the natural sciences. In fact, it tries to get beyond even the natural sciences. It's over and beyond physics itself. So it tries to ask questions like, well, what does existence even mean? What does it mean to say that an object exists? Or what are the basic materials of the universe? The basic building blocks of the universe? What's the overall structure? It asks really strange questions. Some strange, some not so strange. So here's a strange question. Why does it seem as though time is always moving forward? Why isn't it possible, for example, that time might move backward? Is time travel even coherent? Is it even possible, let alone feasible? Here's a more familiar question that I think many people have. Does God exist? And if God exists, does God exist outside of time or inside of time? Or if God exists, what kind of attributes or properties does God have? And if God doesn't exist, then what? How do we think about the cosmos and the nature of the universe? And so these are just a couple of ideas. We're going to see metaphysics almost right up front with René Descartes. And so we'll say more about that. Another thing we're going to see right up front is called epistemology. So epistemology stems from this Greek word episteme. And episteme stands for stands for knowledge. And so epistemology is just the study of knowledge. With the study of knowledge, we can ask all kinds of questions like, well, how do we ever get to know anything at all? By what means do we get to know something? What does it mean to call something a piece of knowledge anyway? Are there certain kinds of requirements to say that something counts as being knowledge? How do we know whether our knowledge is reliable, whether it's trustworthy? Because, after all, the kind of knowledge that we receive from, say, our senses, from our sense perception, might be different than the kind of knowledge that we receive from thinking, or it might be different than the kind of knowledge we receive from testimony from others, or by looking into a scientific journal, or so on. And so one of the first issues we will deal with involves epistemology and Descartes. One of the questions he's going to ask is, well, what can I know? And in particular, he's going to ask a question. What can I know for certain? Absolutely 100% certain. And so we'll look at that soon enough. Let me just get a few others down. Another major field, one we will take up, is ethics or morality. And questions in ethics or morality deal with issues like, well, what is the right thing to do in a given situation? Well, what's the right thing to do at all? Or how should one live at all? What kinds of normative responsibilities or obligations do we have toward each other or to ourselves? What kinds of virtues or vices do we attribute to others and to ourselves, if we attribute them to ourselves at all? And what does it mean to live a good life? How ought we to act? And what are some guiding principles for that, for looking at that? And so in ethics, we're going to look at some applied issues again. We're going to look at a case of abortion and whether it should be or should not be permissible. And this is over and above the legality of abortion. We're asking a moral question. Should it or should it not be permissible? And we're also going to look at some normative theory and also delve into social and political philosophy, which is a branch of ethics. Real fast. Other fields include logic and aesthetics. And we can go even further than this with other branches of philosophy. But with logic, something we're going to start off with briefly, but then I think we're not going to say too much more about logic. We're asking about what kinds of reasoning we engage in, how those kinds of reasonings differ from each other, what are the structure of, say, arguments, how do we support the conclusions that we're trying to draw, what kind of evidence is relevant to those conclusions, and how do we preserve good inferences? An inference being a kind of claim where we move from one statement to the next, and we try to preserve the truth value of that statement as we move from one statement to the next. So what are good, better or worse ways of reasoning in the world? The last one, aesthetics, unfortunately I don't think we're going to say too much about it. Aesthetics deals with issues of art, with issues of taste or judgment. What constitutes something as being, say, a beautiful piece of art? What constitutes something as being an ugly, but nonetheless, perhaps ugly in a way that everybody would find it ugly, piece of artwork? What constitutes humor? What kinds of genres, what are the differences between different kinds of artistic genres? And how do they bleed into each other? Are there any kinds of structures that are relevant? And so aesthetics has been important since at least, well, really at least since Plato, since Aristotle's Poetics and Rhetoric, and so on. And so in asking all of these questions, we're trying to ask in philosophy, and I think this is what's really key for us at the moment. We're trying to ask fundamental questions. And in asking fundamental or first rate or first in priority kinds of questions, we are going to extend past what other humanities, what other social sciences, even what other natural sciences are willing to ask themselves. Whereas all of those seem to take certain kinds of ideas or premises for granted, starting points for granted. In philosophy, what we're doing is evaluating those starting points and trying to self-evaluate and reflect upon not only the ways that we live, but the very fundamental beliefs and core values that we have when engaging in our lives, when living them, when we engage in other disciplines or fields, and trying to get at the most basic ideas. And so in saying that, we will be delving into all these issues over the next 6 weeks. And it's going to be difficult. You're not going to agree with everything that we do. You might find yourself agreeing with things that you didn't think you agreed with before. And so I hope that you find this engaging. I hope you find it intellectually stimulating. And that's what we'll be working on over the next 6 weeks. Okay.